Off the fading sun washed the frontier in shades of gold and rose as the wind whispered over the dry earth surrounding the old wooden church at Willow Ridge, a place once filled with hymns and hope, but now standing quietly against the vast open land as though it alone remembered the prayers whispered inside its walls. On this evening the church was not empty, for a soft trembling sob drifted from its doorway, so faint it almost blended with the rustle of the pines, yet so filled with pain that it carried farther than any shout. Caleb Morgan, a seasoned cowboy returning from a long day of driving cattle along the southern pastures, heard it just as he rode past the narrow trail that curved toward the church. His horse slowed on its own, sensing his change in posture, and Caleb sat still for a moment, head slightly tilted, listening. He had heard many sounds in his life: wolf howls, wounded horses, desperate men, but this was different. This was the sound of someone whose heart had been broken clean in two. With a quiet sigh, Caleb swung his leg over the saddle and dismounted, the dust rising around his boots as he hit the ground. He tied his horse to the old post beside the church fence, though he doubted it was necessary. His horse, like him, wasn't going anywhere until they knew what the trouble was. Each step Caleb took toward the church door was slow and deliberate, his boots thudding softly against the dry dirt as though he feared startling whoever was inside. When he reached the doorway, he paused, his shadow stretching across the steps where a girl sat hunched over, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders trembling with each broken breath. She didn't see him at first, too lost in her sorrow to notice anything beyond it. Caleb removed his hat out of both habit and respect, and knelt down slightly so that he wasn't towering over her. "Miss?" he said gently. She froze. Her crying stilled, though her breath still shook. Slowly she lifted her face just enough for him to see the tears streaking down her cheeks, her braids coming undone, and her blue dress covered in dust as though she had run for miles without stopping. Her lips trembled, and she quickly looked down again, ashamed of her tears. Caleb softened his voice even further. "I'm not here to harm you. I heard you crying. That's all." For a moment she didn't speak, didn't move, only stared at her hands as if unsure whether she deserved to be seen. Then in the smallest voice, she whispered, "I didn't know where else to go." Her words cracked in the middle, carrying the weight of something deep, something painful. Caleb glanced around the empty land, understanding the desperation in her tone. Out here, there weren't many places one could run to, and fewer places where someone would listen. "Church is as good a place as any," he said softly. "Better than most," she sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand like a child scolded too many times. "Not today," she whispered. "Today, it felt empty, like even God turned his face from me." Caleb shook his head gently. "Sometimes it ain't God who turns away. Sometimes it's the world that pushes us so hard we can't hear him no more." She finally looked up fully, and Caleb saw her eyes, red, swollen, but filled with a plea, a silent question begging for someone to understand her without her having to say another word. Caleb felt something tighten in his chest, an ache that told him this girl didn't choose her heartbreak. It had been forced upon her. He lowered himself to sit beside her on the wooden step, leaving enough space to not frighten her, yet close enough that she wouldn't feel alone. "What happened?" he asked. She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing as she tried to steady herself. "My name is Emma." Caleb nodded slowly. "I'm Caleb." She took a shaky breath, letting the name settle in her mind, drawing comfort from simply not being nameless anymore. "I was supposed to marry today," she said, her voice breaking on the last word. Caleb stiffened slightly but didn't speak, letting her continue. "My father arranged it. He said it was a good match. Said the man had money, land, security." She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the horizon as though she still feared being chased. "But he wasn't kind. He never was. And nobody cared." A tear slipped down her cheek, catching on her jaw before falling onto her dress. "He hurt people. He hurt me. But my father said marriage would fix me, make me obedient. So today, when they dressed me, when they braided my hair and tied ribbons into it, I felt like a lamb being led to slaughter." Her breath hitched, so I ran. I ran until my legs felt like they were splitting apart. Caleb's jaw tightened, anger simmering quietly beneath his calm expression, though he kept his voice steady. "You did the right thing." Emma shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe I'm a coward. Maybe I doom myself. Caleb turned slightly, studying her. "You're brave," he said firmly. "Braver than most. Takes courage to walk away from what's wrong even when everyone around you says it's right." She looked at him again, and this time her stare held desperation mingled with disbelief. "Do you really think so?" Caleb nodded once. "I know so." Silence settled between them for a long moment, but it wasn't heavy. It was the kind of silence that lets a wound breathe. Emma's shoulders relaxed slightly, though her hands still trembled. Caleb noticed the raw skin on her palms, the torn fabric at her elbows, signs that she had fallen along the way. Without speaking, he reached out gently and lifted her chin so she met his gaze. She flinched only slightly before allowing the contact, her eyes softening as she searched his for any trace of falsehood. There was none. "You ain't alone now," Caleb said quietly. "Not while I'm here." Emma inhaled shakily, as though those words filled a hollow space inside her. Caleb stood then and extended his hand to her. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you off this cold step. We'll figure the rest out as it comes." She stared at his hand for a long moment, torn between fear and hope. Finally, slowly, she placed her trembling hand into his. Caleb's fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. As he helped her up, the sky above them deepened into a dusky purple, and the world around them seemed to grow still. As though witnessing the quiet beginning of something neither of them yet understood, Emma stood unsteadily for a moment, gripping Caleb's hand as though it was the only solid thing left in her world. For the first time since morning she breathed without crying, and under that vast open sky, with the church behind them and the uncertain road ahead, something shifted, something gentle, something destined, something that felt like the very first spark of a future, rewriting itself in the soft space between two wounded hearts. The sky had fully surrendered tonight by the time Caleb led Emma away from the church doors, their footsteps soft in the settling dust as the horizon dimmed into a sweep of deep blue studded with emerging stars, each one flickering like a whispered promise that the darkness would not swallow them whole. Emma's hand remained in Caleb's longer than she had intended, not because she feared letting go, but because the warmth of his steady grip felt like the only anchor left in a world that had spun too violently in a single day. And although she didn't know where he planned to take her, she followed without hesitation. Caleb guided her toward his horse, a calm, patient creature that stood quietly as though sensing the fragility of the moment. "Easy now," Caleb murmured as he helped Emma up, and she settled into the saddle with her skirt draped over one side, clutching the worn leather horn while Caleb mounted behind her, one arm loosely around her to steady her as they set off toward the small cabin he kept on the outskirts of Willow Ridge. The ride was slow, not because the horse couldn't go faster, but because Caleb didn't want to rush her. He wanted her to feel the breeze, the open sky, the vastness of the world beyond the walls of her father's home and the cruelty she had fled. Emma leaned back slightly, not enough to intrude upon him, but enough to ease the ache in her spine as she watched the church vanish behind them. "You sure this is safe?" she asked softly. Caleb nodded. "Ain't nobody gonna find you at my place unless I want them to." His voice carried a confidence that sank into her bones, quieting the tremor of fear that still lingered. The cabin came into view, a modest but sturdy structure nestled between tall pines, with smoke rising faintly from a dying fire in the chimney and the warm glow of a lantern flickering through the window. Caleb dismounted first, then lifted Emma down carefully, his hands steady on her waist, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of discomfort. Emma stepped back to take in the place, and for the first time since fleeing her home, she felt a strange, subtle sense of safety wash over her. "Ain't much," Caleb said, rubbing the back of his neck, suddenly aware of how simple his life looked. "But it's honest, and it's quiet." She managed a small smile, fragile but real. "Quiet sounds perfect." Inside, the cabin smelled of pine wood, leather, and warmth, like a place where burdens were set down rather than picked up. Caleb poured her a cup of water, and Emma drank slowly, savoring the cool liquid as though it were the first real relief she'd felt all day. Caleb leaned against the table, arms crossed over his chest, studying her cautiously. "You ain't hurt nowhere, are you?" Emma shook her head, though her hands still trembled slightly. "Just tired," she whispered. "Tired of running. Tired of being scared." Caleb's expression softened. "You ain't gotta run no more." Emma looked away, her eyes filling again. "They'll come for me. My father. The man he tried to force me to marry? They won't let this go. Not without punishing me. Caleb pushed away from the table, knelt in front of her just as he had at the church, and gently lifted her chin. Let them come, he said, voice steady as iron. I've faced worse men than them, and I'm still standing. Anybody who wants to drag you back into misery gotta go through me first. Emma stared at him, her breath catching at the intensity of his promise. She had never in her life been defended, never been chosen. Not for her happiness, not for her safety, not for who she was. Yet here was this cowboy, practically a stranger, speaking with the conviction of someone who had already decided she mattered. Why? She whispered. Why would you do that for me? Caleb held her gaze with unwavering sincerity. Because I know what it's like to feel trapped, to feel like the world's stacked against you. Nobody deserves that. And you deserve a chance to breathe. Emma lowered her eyes, overwhelmed by emotions she'd never had space to feel before. Caleb stood again, giving her room, and busied himself lighting a fresh lantern, though Emma noticed his hands trembled just slightly as well, not from fear but from the weight of what he had just vowed. The night deepened around them, and the quiet chirp of crickets filled the spaces between their silence. Slowly, Emma rose from her chair and walked to the doorway, looking out at the dark expanse of pines swaying in the wind. Do you ever get lonely out here? She asked softly. Caleb leaned against the doorframe beside her. Sometimes, he admitted, but sometimes peace feels better than company that ain't good for you. Emma nodded, absorbing the truth of his words as though they applied to her more than to him. A sudden crack of a twig outside made her jump, but Caleb reached over and steadied her instantly. Probably just a deer, he assured her. This land is full of life at night. She relaxed slightly, though her breath still trembled. I feel like I'm still hearing footsteps behind me, she said. Like, any moment he'll grab me and drag me back. Caleb turned to her, his expression fierce, protective. Ain't nobody dragging you nowhere. Not now, not ever again. The words hit her hard, so hard she had to grip the railing to keep from crying all over again. Caleb? She whispered. He stepped closer. Yeah? She hesitated only a moment before speaking the words that had formed quietly in her heart since the moment he found her on the church steps. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but for the first time, I'm not scared of tomorrow if you're there. Caleb's breath hitched almost imperceptibly, but his eyes softened in a way that felt like a promise. He reached out carefully, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, and when she didn't flinch this time, he let his thumb rest lightly against her skin. Emma, he murmured, I ain't going nowhere. Not as long as you need me. Her heart beat hard against her ribs. Not with fear, but with something new, something warm, something hopeful, something that made her feel alive again. Caleb slowly took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers, and she let him, her grip tightening with trust rather than desperation. You're safe, he repeated. With me, you're safe. Emma leaned her forehead gently against his chest, finally allowing herself to be held, and Caleb wrapped his arms around her as though shielding her from every darkness still, lingering beyond the cabin walls. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the quiet promise of a new beginning, and inside the small cabin, two broken souls found a fragile but powerful peace that felt like the start of something eternal. And as their story slowly began to rewrite itself under the vast, starlit sky of Willow Ridge, remember to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next chapter in tales that stir the heart, grip the soul, and bring moments like this to life again and again.